Imagine being humiliated in front of a crowd, judged just because of how you look. That's exactly what happened to this elderly man at the airport. But what no one knew was his real identity, and when the pilot found out, his reaction left everyone speechless. Stay with me, because this story will change the way you see respect forever. Jim Carter stood patiently in line at the airport, his weathered bomber jacket a testament to a lifetime of experiences that few could fathom. At 74, he was a retired Air Force pilot, each crease in his face a story of valor and sacrifice. Clutching his leather duffel bag, filled with personal memorabilia and memories of his past, he exuded a quiet dignity that contrasted sharply with the bustling chaos of the terminal. The overhead announcements echoed around him, but Jim remained focused, his mind drifting to the countless flights he had piloted, the lives he had touched. As he approached the counter, the atmosphere shifted. Mark Benson, a young airline employee with slicked back hair and an air of arrogance, barely glanced up from his screen. "Next," he barked, his voice sharp and dismissive. Jim stepped forward, his heart racing slightly, not from fear but from a longing to be treated with respect. "Excuse me, young man," Jim began, his voice calm yet resolute. "I'd like to inquire about a seat upgrade." Mark snorted, rolling his eyes. "You're in the wrong line, old-timer. This is for first-class passengers only." The tension in the air was palpable, and a few nearby passengers exchanged uncomfortable glances, their eyes rolling in disbelief at Mark's rudeness. Jim felt the sting of humiliation creeping in, but he held his ground, refusing to let the young man's contempt define him. "Actually, I believe I'm in the right place," Jim replied, maintaining his composure. "I've flown many miles in my day and I'd appreciate a little courtesy." Mark let out a laugh, a harsh sound that echoed through the terminal, causing a ripple of laughter from a small group of onlookers. Jim stepped back, the laughter ringing in his ears like a cruel mockery. He felt the weight of their eyes, stripping away the layers of his dignity. The world around him blurred into a haze as he grappled with the unexpected humiliation, wondering how a simple inquiry had turned into such a public spectacle. Emily Reynolds stood at the edge of the terminal, her heart racing as she watched the scene unfold before her. The laughter of nearby passengers echoed in her ears, but it was the look of humiliation on Jim Carter's face that cut her deeply. She felt an overwhelming sense of injustice. How could anyone treat a man like that, especially one who had served his country so valiantly? Jim's dignity was being stripped away by the arrogance of a young airline employee. Determined to rectify this wrong, Emily gathered her thoughts and rushed toward the jet bridge. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and she could still hear Mark Benson's mocking tone as he dismissed Jim. "You're in the wrong line, old man. Maybe you should have retired a bit earlier." His condescending laughter rang in her ears, fueling her resolve. As she approached the captain's lounge, Emily's breath quickened. She found Captain Richard Lawson, a senior pilot known for his integrity and respect for veterans. "Captain Lawson," she said, urgency lacing her voice, "I need to talk to you about something important." Richard turned to her, his expression serious. "What is it, Emily?" "It's about that man back at the counter, Jim Carter. He's a veteran, a decorated pilot, and Mark just humiliated him in front of everyone. It's completely unacceptable." Emily's voice trembled slightly, the indignation pouring out. Captain Lawson's brow furrowed and he crossed his arms thoughtfully. "Jim Carter? The name sounds familiar. He was a legend in the Air Force." "Exactly. And Mark treated him like he was nothing." Emily's eyes sparkled with determination. "We need to fix this. He deserves recognition, not ridicule." Richard's expression hardened as he realized the gravity of the situation. "You're right. It's time we honor him properly." The captain straightened, a fire igniting in his eyes. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Emily. I'll make sure Jim gets the respect he deserves." With that, Captain Lawson strode toward the boarding area, a man on a mission. Emily felt a surge of hope. She knew they could turn this moment around for Jim, and she was ready to fight for his dignity. As the boarding process continued, Captain Richard Lawson stood at the front of the aircraft, his mind racing with thoughts of how to honor his old friend, Jim Carter. He glanced at the passengers shuffling through the jet bridge, their chatter a dull hum in the background. The captain took a deep breath, the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. He had to do this right. With a firm grip on the microphone, Captain Lawson cleared his throat, his voice resonating through the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please?" The boarding area quieted, passengers turning their heads toward the source of the voice. "I would like to take a moment to introduce a very special guest on this flight today." As he spoke, Mark Benson stood slightly to the side, his earlier bravado evaporating into thin air. Confusion mingled with dread as he realized the captain was addressing Jim Carter, the very man he had ridiculed just moments before. The atmosphere shifted, a palpable sense of anticipation filling the air. Mr. Jim Carter is not just another passenger. He is a decorated veteran of the United States Air Force, Lawson continued, his tone imbued with respect. With a legacy in aviation that spans decades, Jim is a true hero who has served this country with honor and distinction. A ripple of shock and admiration coursed through the crowd. Gasps replaced the earlier laughter, and a hush fell as passengers began to exchange glances, recognizing the significance of the moment. Mark's face drained of color, his heart racing as he connected the dots. The old man in the bomber jacket was not just a frail figure but a symbol of bravery and sacrifice. As Lawson spoke, the applause began slowly, hesitant at first, but it quickly grew into a thunderous ovation. Jim, who had been standing quietly to the side, felt the warmth of the crowd wash over him. His heart swelled with a mix of pride and humility, the sting of earlier humiliation fading away. He raised his hand slightly in acknowledgement, a faint smile breaking through the lines of his weathered face. Mark's eyes widened in disbelief, his earlier arrogance stripped bare. The laughter that had once echoed in his ears transformed into a chorus of respect, and he felt a profound sense of shame wash over him. He had let his youthful pride cloud his judgment, and now he stood as a witness to the true worth of the man he had disrespected. As the applause continued, Jim's heart raced. This moment of recognition was beyond anything he had expected. It was a reminder that even in the twilight of life, one could find redemption and honor in the eyes of others. He took a step forward, ready to embrace this unexpected turn, while Mark stood frozen, grappling with the realization that respect was not just given, it was earned. Captain Lawson stood tall, the atmosphere in the cabin electrified with anticipation as he turned his gaze to Jim. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice clear and commanding, "I would like to take a moment to honor a very special guest on today's flight. Please join me in welcoming Colonel Jim Carter, a distinguished veteran and a true hero of our skies." The words hung in the air, and Jim felt the heat of the spotlight suddenly turn his way. Gasps of surprise rippled through the crowd, followed by spontaneous applause. The clapping grew louder, echoing off the cabin walls, and Jim, momentarily taken aback, felt the warmth of gratitude wash over him. It was a stark contrast to the ridicule he had faced just moments before. If this story is already making you feel something, imagine how many others need to hear this lesson. Hit the like button right now so more people can see this powerful message. And tell me in the comments, have you ever seen someone being judged unfairly? Let's spread kindness together, Captain Lawson continued, his tone filled with admiration. Jim and I flew many missions together, and his bravery and dedication to our country are a testament to the values we all hold dear. Every time we took to the skies, we knew we were in good hands with Jim at the controls. Jim, still processing the unexpected recognition, stood up slowly, his heart swelling. "Thank you, Captain Lawson," he replied, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "It's an honor to be here surrounded by such wonderful people." The crowd erupted into cheers, and for the first time that day, Jim felt a sense of belonging. As he made his way to first class, guided by a flight attendant, Jim noticed Mark's face pale and stricken with realization. The young man's previously arrogant demeanor had crumbled, and all that was left was a deep sense of regret. He approached Jim, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm sorry for how I treated you." Jim paused, meeting Mark's gaze. "I appreciate your apology," he said softly, embodying the very essence of forgiveness. "We all have our moments, don't we?" The sincerity in Jim's tone surprised even him. Mark nodded, visibly relieved, yet ashamed. As Jim settled into the plush seat of first class, he felt a sense of peace envelop him. The cabin buzzed with new conversations, passengers sharing stories, and for the first time that day the atmosphere felt uplifting and respectful. Jim leaned back, reflecting on how quickly life could change, and he was grateful for the second chance to be seen for who he truly was. Settled into first class, Jim Carter gazed out the window, his heart swelling with a mix of pride and nostalgia. The clouds drifted lazily beneath him, resembling the wisps of memories from his past, each one a testament to a life filled with service and sacrifice. He thought of the years spent in the cockpit, the thrill of soaring through the skies and the camaraderie shared with fellow pilots. "I didn't expect this today," he murmured to himself, a faint smile creeping onto his weathered face. In the cabin, the atmosphere buzzed with a newfound energy. Captain Lawson, having just finished his heartfelt announcement, looked out over the passengers, who were now sharing stories of their own military experiences. "Did you hear that? My grandfather was in the Navy during World War II," a young woman said to her companion, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "He always talked about the camaraderie." "Same here. My uncle flew helicopters in Vietnam. He had some wild stories," another passenger chimed in, as laughter and animated discussions filled the air. The bond formed among the travelers was palpable, each person connecting through shared respect for those who served. As the flight took off, Emily Reynolds walked through the cabin, wiping away tears that had gathered in her eyes. She felt a profound sense of pride swelling within her chest, witnessing the transformation that had unfolded after Jim's recognition. Her heart raced as she glanced at Jim, who was now beaming with joy, the weight of his earlier humiliation replaced by a sense of validation. "It's amazing how one moment can change everything," she thought, smiling softly at him. "Thank you for being you, sir," a nearby passenger said, catching Jim's attention. "Your service means more to all of us than you know." Jim turned, his eyes misty yet filled with gratitude. "I appreciate that," he replied, his voice steady but warm. "It's not just about me. It's about all those who served and sacrificed." The cabin echoed with murmurs of agreement, each passenger recognizing the depth of Jim's words. In that moment, Jim felt an overwhelming sense of belonging, as if the years of being overlooked had finally come to an end. He realized that humility and respect could foster connections that transcended generations. It was a flight, not just through the skies, but through the hearts of those who honored his legacy. Just as the flight reached cruising altitude, a sudden jolt of turbulence rattled the aircraft, sending a wave of anxiety through the cabin. The overhead bins rattled ominously, and some passengers gasped, clutching their armrests in fear. Jim Carter, seated in first class, felt the familiar surge of adrenaline course through him. His years as an Air Force pilot kicked in instinctively, and he immediately sprang into action. "Everyone, please remain calm." Jim's voice boomed with an authority that surprised even him. He stood up, his solid frame commanding attention amidst the chaos. "This is just turbulence. It's normal. We've trained for this." His heart raced, but his demeanor remained steady, and he made eye contact with several passengers, offering reassuring nods. In the back of the plane, Mark Benson, who had been watching the scene unfold from a distance, felt a strange shift within himself. The arrogance he once wore like armor began to crumble as he witnessed Jim's leadership. He had dismissed the old man as just another passenger, but now he saw an embodiment of strength and resilience. Mark's cheeks flushed with shame as he realized he had misjudged Jim entirely. As the turbulence subsided, Jim continued to guide the passengers, his voice calm and steady. "Breathe deeply, everyone. We're through the worst of it. Let's just sit back and relax." The tension in the cabin began to ease, and passengers exchanged relieved glances, some even smiling at Jim's professionalism. Once the flight stabilized, the cabin crew resumed their duties, but the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Passengers began to speak in hushed tones, sharing stories of their own experiences with turbulence, military service, and bravery. Jim felt a warmth spread through him. The respect he had longed for was finally being bestowed. After the flight returned to smooth skies, Mark found himself standing at the front of first class, his heart pounding. He approached Jim, who was sitting back, his gaze still fixed out the window, lost in thought. "Excuse me, sir?" Mark began, his voice trembling slightly. Jim turned to him, eyebrows raised in curiosity. I want to apologize for how I treated you earlier," Mark stammered, the weight of his words heavy in the air. "I didn't know who you were. I was wrong. You deserve so much respect for your service." Jim smiled softly, his eyes warm with understanding. "Thank you, son. It takes a lot to admit when we're wrong. It's a sign of strength." As they exchanged a meaningful glance, Mark felt a profound realization wash over him, understanding the true essence of honor and humility. The flight landed safely, and as Jim stepped off the plane, he carried with him a sense of closure. He had reclaimed his dignity and, in a way, transformed a heart along the journey. The world felt a little brighter, and he knew his legacy was one of respect, not just for himself, but for others as well. If this story touched your heart, then you belong to a special group of people who still believe in respect and humility. Don't miss out on more stories like this. Subscribe now and hit the notification bell. And if you know someone who needs to hear this lesson, share this video with them. Let's remind the world that true worth isn't measured by appearances.